Thank you very much, Kasari. And thanks to all of you for being so on time. It's great, and it will allow us to address some of the questions that we gather from our audience a little bit later on. Our next speaker is Dorothy Chun. Dorothy is a professor emerita in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology here at Simon Fraser University. Her primary areas of research and teaching are crime and madness and social welfare, policing violence by and against women, feminism, law and social change, politics of the family, and media representations of social issues. You have a wide range of interests, Madame. She has collaborated on a number of research projects funded by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, including the Health and Home Project that focused on the impact of unsafe housing on the health of women in the downtown east side of Vancouver. And she's currently working on a study of the history of autonomous unmarried motherhood in Canada. She is also involved with the Centre for the Study of Gender, Social Disparities and Mental Health at SFU, and is the co-leader of a team working in the thematic area of criminal justice, the system, mental health, and substance use. She's written a lot lately about specific issues that I thought were worth pointing out, just so that you know what areas she's thinking about very specifically right now. She's been looking at the legal tender of gender, welfare law and the regulation of women's poverty, reaction and resistance, feminism, law and social change, and women, madness and the law, a feminist reader. Tonight, Dorothy Chun is going to be speaking to us about meeting the challenge of men's rights activism in this realm. Good evening. Come on up. Dorothy Chun.
Okay, thank you, Kathryn, and I'll take up another couple of seconds of my 8 minutes by thanking the organizers and sponsors of this event. I've been really enjoying hearing the experiences and observations of the other speakers, so that's one of the advantages of coming later on in the program. My comments this evening are based on one of the projects that Kathryn just mentioned, that focused on feminism, law, and social change, and the reaction and resistance to it. The project began during the late 90s and carried over into the 21st century. And basically, we were focusing on reaction to feminist equality seeking initiatives, particularly in the area of law and policy, from the 1960s to the end of the 20th century. Thanks. So I'm going to talk a bit about the background to the project, present a few of our research findings, and discuss some of the implications of our research for feminists and pro-feminists and other equality-seeking movements and campaigns in the contemporary context. I don't know where this is coming from, who are still in the contemporary context trying to meet the challenge of men's rights activism in various arenas. So some background. The idea of doing the research project was very much linked to what was going on inside feminism and outside feminism during the mid-90s in Canada and other liberal democratic states, I might add. Men's rights activism that was overtly hostile to feminism in particular was very much present, or is becoming very much present in mainstream media and public culture more generally around that time, and was really beginning to explode on the internet as websites proliferated, and particularly in the areas of criminal law, family law, and sexual harassment policy. This anti-feminism of the men's rights organizations was reflected in two scenarios that were circulating widely. One scenario was telling us that far from helping women, feminists had made things worse for women through their efforts by luring them out of their proper sphere as homemakers and into paid employment thereby generating any number of social problems from family breakdown to youth crime. The other scenario was telling us that feminism had achieved its purpose and outlived its usefulness by the mid-90s, that women had now achieved equality with men, and since we're all equal now, we have a charter, and we're all on an even plane, feminism is no longer needed. We have charter rights, we have equality of opportunity, and therefore feminists who keep talking about women's continuing inequality are making unreasonable demands, and in fact reverse discrimination is occurring and men are becoming targeted as victims. I might mention, but I can't go into detail, but it was very significant to us, we think, that men's rights activism was bolstered by women who often had women's studies degrees and identified as former feminists or dissident feminists or false feminists. And they were often some of the very women who had benefited most from the efforts of second-wave feminists. There was what also interested us was the ample evidence that many of the claims made by men's rights and fathers' rights activists and their allies could not be sustained, with evidence. And yet it didn't really seem to matter that this was the case. And so I and my colleagues were interested in investigating this phenomenon. And of course, feminists were starting to talk about pushback and how they could strategize to meet the challenge of men's rights and fathers' rights activism. So we thought that our research, which would take a long view from the 60s to the turn of the 21st century, might be helpful to feminist strategizing. So we all researched different topics and looked at different institutional sites. I analyzed newspaper coverage of equality issues over that time period. One of my colleagues investigated the content of a sample of the men's rights, fathers' rights websites. Other colleagues looked at the area of family law, custody access, child support, and so on. So what did we find? Our research supports the observation of the English feminist Rosalind Coward that feminism is never popular. So far from there being some golden era or golden age where feminists were totally in control of everything, what our research seemed to demonstrate is that resistance to feminism is always present in our society. But at the same time, there are levels of intensity. And so, at some points in time, the reaction against or the resistance to feminism is greater than others. So we see a unilinear curve, in fact, so that the late 60s, early 70s, there was intense resistance to feminist demands at that time for basic political and civil rights. Then through the late 70s and 80s, we have more space for feminists in public culture and more influence from feminists during that decade. And then by the mid-90s, we see what's called the backlash, I guess, but certainly strong, intense resistance, which is linked to the rise, the phenomenal rise, really, of these fathers' rights and men's rights activists. So overall, our research suggests that feminists never controlled the agenda-setting process in the realms of law and policy making during the time period that we studied, but they have been active and they have influenced, to varying degrees, the legal and policy reforms that we've seen over those 4 decades that we were interested in. So what are the implications of our research for meeting the challenge of men's rights activism? I think at this point in time, this is a period of very intense resistance to feminism or anything that defines itself as being critical or progressive. We've seen the slash and burn just in the last few weeks at the federal level with entire programs, being totally eliminated because the funding has been cut. So I think we're at a moment in time when running hard to stand still probably is a victory, and that feminists should not, be upset or obsessed about the fact that feminists are not making gains, clear gains in the realms of activity that they're engaged in. And I think they should continue to, keep on doing what they've been doing, the legal education or judicial education or whatever, their arena is. I think, they should feel good about what they're doing and continue to do that. But I also think that, there needs to be pushback and that feminists need to think hard, not that they haven't tried this already, but to make the point that civil and legal rights as enshrined in the Charter are great, because, there was a point in time when married women in particular didn't enjoy those rights. But at the same time, that vision of equality is incomplete. And we need to feminists need to try and inject into public consciousness the idea that there are different ways of looking at equality, and to challenge the dominant conception of equality now, which is, much in tune with the men's rights and fathers' rights activists who are looking at equality as identical treatment of people because we're all equal now, and we have equality of opportunity, and therefore, it's up to us to make the most of that. And if we don't, then we have nobody to blame but ourselves. And I think that feminists have to say, well, that's not enough, and we need to be thinking about equality in terms of outcomes. Okay? Because when you do that, and equal outcomes of policies and laws that are implemented. Because when you do that, you challenge this notion of identical treatment, because you can't treat people who are not situated on an even plane, and they obviously aren't, by virtue of race, class, ethnicity, sexuality, and, disability, and so on and so forth. And so you can't treat people equally without perpetuating inequality in our society. Okay, so I mean, there's lots of other implications of our research, but I think my 8 minutes are probably up, and Kathryn's been probably waving frantically at me. So thanks very much, and I'll stop there.
Waving, but not frantically. It was fine. Thank you very much, Dorothy. Very important perspective to hear tonight. Thank you. Our last speakers are going to be speaking together. Rosa Elena Arteaga and Angela Marie MacDougall from the Battered Women's Support Services are going to join us. I'll just tell you a tiny bit about each of them. Rosa Elena has been working in the anti-violence field for more than 12 years, delivering workshops on violence against women and providing crisis intervention and violence against women training to service providers at the local, provincial, and national level. She has a wealth of experience as a counselor and an advocate for women escaping violence, and for the last 8 years, she's worked as the manager of direct services and programs for BWSS. Now, Angela, her biography can kind of be distilled down into this. She has been, is, and will continue to keep working to end violence against women. Today, she and her partner, Rosa, are going to be speaking about the legal system as the last resort for women dealing with violence. Rosa and Angela, come on up.
So I feel so validated by everybody's presentation, and it's an honor to be here. We work every day on the front lines, and we understand everything you have been sharing with us. I'm here with my colleague Angela. We have been working together for 8 years, and we have a commitment and a passion. We want to end violence against women. That's our dream, and it's what we do every day. So we are going to talk about why for women to access the legal system is the last resource. And I want to talk about women arrest. There was a time where violence against women in intimate relationship was not understood, was not addressed, and of course we as women had to struggle to bring that to the light. And then we were able to include policies and practices that address violence in intimate relationships. There was a time where men were beating up their wives, and then when police came, they got asked to just go for a walk, and women got given maybe a book that said how to be a good wife. So we have come a long way, but now, 2012, I have to talk about women arrest. For the last 3 years, we start noticing that women were arrested, and then they were referred to our services because they were seen as the perpetrators and no one wanted to support them. So when I noticed that one woman came 1 week, another woman came the next week, and I started analyzing what were the situations, I decided to collect all the cases that came to my attention. So I would like to share with you what is the problem that we saw, what are the patterns that we observe, and what are the remedies that we were able to put in place. So up to today, I have gathered 40 cases. In those 40 cases, there is no dual arrest, because when we have talked to the police and with other service providers, their concern is that, maybe it's dual arrest, because now we call it domestic violence, and because we are equal and maybe we have the same strength, so then we arrest two parties. Well, we haven't seen the dual arrest in the last 3 years. What we have seen is women being arrested. In this research that we are going to share with you, in all cases, the women were in relationships where they were victims of sustained abuse by their partners. So when the police came, they never explored or assessed who was the primary aggressor. They didn't ask the woman if there was history of abuse, and in several cases, the man had already been arrested and he had criminal records. They didn't check the records, they just arrested the woman. In 16 of the cases, the police had been called before in relation to the male partner's abuse. In 60% of the cases, the women who were arrested were immigrant women who at the time, they didn't speak English. And the partner, male partner, was the one who did all the talk. He was the one who gave his side of the story. The woman didn't get an interpreter, and we have a case where the woman was put in jail 4 days. In 3 cases, the male partner did hurt himself. So let me tell you that in the majority of cases where women use self-defense, the self-defense was like a scratch, or to say, if you do something to me, I'm going to protect myself. But there are 3 cases where he is the one who hurt himself, and then he called the police. Police came, took pictures, she got arrested and charged. In 8 cases, the Ministry of Children and Families got involved, and the children were given to the father. 90% of the cases where there were children involved, later on when the woman had to go to the family court, she got affected because then custody and access benefit more the man. What is interesting, and that's why I feel validated, is that there is a man's club where, the judge, I guess, hears the man's side of the story. So when the man has been charged because he has assaulted his wife, the issue of custody and access is not an issue. There is like the same access, but when the woman has been charged, usually in these cases that we have, the man has given custody or more time with the father. So when we start noticing all these things, we start thinking about remedies, right? Because we cannot rely on the criminal justice system because it's the same system that is punishing women. So we start listening to women's stories, building trust, validating their stories, and believing them. Because it's not just that we believe because we believe because we know that there is a pattern, that there are dynamics of violence, and that someone in the relationship is stronger and has more access to maybe financial resources, weapons, and it's the physical strength, and other factors that we understand through doing our work. So through analyzing that, we knew that the woman was telling the truth and her side of the story. Through this support, we advocate with the Ministry of Children and Families, so we were able to get back some of the children who were involved in these cases. We filed 3 police complaints. These cases are mainly with RCMP. Let me tell you that so far with Vancouver Police Department, we have a good relationship, and we have only 2 cases that have been referred by them, and that they have acknowledged that they didn't do a proper assessment. But RCMP has been hard to assess this and to make them accountable. So we decided to file 3 police complaints. We went to one of the police detachments where we noticed that more women were being arrested. And the good thing about that detachment, and I think that, it's hard that we have to talk about this, but I feel proud to say that we were able to address the issue. And then they made a commitment to assess the primary aggressor, and we haven't had any reports or any cases coming from that detachment. Now we are vigilant. We are observing other detachments. We continue working on that. We also met with the E Division, RCMP E Division, and we asked them to change their policies around dual arrest and to, again, reinforce the primary aggressor policy and to really make assessment. And, to have these meetings is not that we call them and say, hi, we are Battered Women Support Services, we have concerns, can you meet with us? Let me tell you that it took lots of phone calls, letters, sometimes getting very tough, until they were able to say, yes, okay, let's meet. And in one of the detachments, they were open to show us some of the statistics that they had been gathering for 1 year, and they agreed that there had been an increase on women arrests. So I want to pass the microphone to my colleague and just say that we are going to keep doing what we are doing, that we keep ourselves vigilant, that this hasn't stopped, and that justice for women, equality for women is an ongoing work. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosa Elena, and thank you everyone for being here tonight. It's an incredible night. I've lost track of what day it is. Is it Tuesday? Is it? Yeah. Thank you. And thank you so much for Pivot and Darcy and for AM for convening us and for this invitation, which matters so much. And certainly thank you, Donna Martinson, for your getting us off to this amazing start. And thank you to my colleagues who are doing this amazing work. This work is happening, of course, as we know, on these unceded territories of the Coast Salish people. And I don't come from this land. My ancestors come from Ghana and from Africa. And I do have the tremendous honor and privilege to work with my amazing colleague, Rosa Elena Arteaga, doing the work to end violence against women. And we have a number of Battered Women Support Services representatives here tonight, and I'm so glad that you came out tonight, a rainy night. And, from our point of view, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about gender violence, and it's difficult to see, I think, maybe because the writing is really small, but we're talking about violence against women that's very gendered, that begins from infancy and continues on until being a senior. And that for the women that we're seeing in our organization, this is the reality. That women are dealing with violence from day one until, till the end. And it is endemic, and it's an epidemic. And tonight we're talking about gender and justice. And the question, of course, is to what extent can we have justice? within this land that we understand as Canada. This is I just want to show you this proclamation that came this week, that is a proclamation announcing that this week is Victims of Crime Awareness Week. And it comes from the Queen, our auntie over there, reminding us, though, of her reign. And the reign, what we're talking about is, of course, the reality in which that Canada is a nation that has been colonized by England and France, which is to say that our legal traditions come from there and are embedded within our society and, are a part of our society and stratify us as people based on the ideological underpinnings of the colonizers, which is very clear in terms of how that shakes down around gender, that women as property, rooted in the legal traditions, and certainly about white supremacy and class bias and homophobia. So the question then we have to ask is, to what extent can we think that this system is going to provide a measure of justice? This comes from Facebook. It's unattributed. If you know who took this picture, please tell me, I'll attribute it later. I make the point because for us that are doing this frontline work, we are closely tied with the Ministry of Justice in that our funding comes from the Ministry of Justice, and that we are tied in part in order to provide direct services, but we also need to support women to navigate these legal systems. And so it takes up a tremendous amount of our time. I mean, on one hand, we have to applaud the feminists. Let's give it up for the feminists. We have to applaud the feminists and the anti-violence activists who were crystal clear about the need for a new popular consciousness and understanding that violence against women is a serious problem. Did I mention that I'm part of a special interest group? I'm speaking from the perspective of a special interest group, women. And that we wanted a range of legal remedies, and one of those was just quite frankly an effective law enforcement response. Thank you very much. Don't tell the guy to go take a hike, walk around the block. Don't ask her if, did he pay the rent, just to have an effective legal response. And so, now we are so tied to that system every day where, Rosa, my colleagues here from Battery Women Support Services, my colleagues sitting here and here, we spend a significant amount of our time attempting to have the system provide an effective response. Rolling up our sleeves every day in order to have the system provide an effective response. So the question is, to what extent is the legal systems, are they a risk? Rosa's talking about how they are a risk. Increasing criminalization of women who self-defend. Andrea Volins wrote an amazing blog, which we'll post on our website tomorrow, about the men's use of the legal systems in order to continue maintaining power and control over women. They figured it out. Extending their reach now, and the system is playing along because goodness knows we are equal. And that this couldn't be a misuse of the legal systems. And to what extent that the legal system is a resource. And that's what we do every day, is attempt to make the legal system be a resource. Kasari talked about, how to do that, in terms of, the area of law that she was referring to. Grace Tate is speaking about that in terms of child welfare, and the ways that women are, taking action. Dahlia talked about, the extent to which we can seek justice through, bringing sexual assault cases, through the legal systems. And of course, Donna Martinson set the tone, in all of the ways and all the areas of law. This is what we're talking about, a matrix of legal systems that women are navigating. The women that we see are navigating these legal systems. 80% of the women that we see are dealing with family law, often concurrently with criminal law, often concurrently with child welfare, often concurrently with immigration law, often concurrently with the Indian Act, the most racist piece of legislation that we have on the planet. How do we get justice in this context? We have had the legal aid system decimated. Women are having to self-represent in family court. Imagine that. To what extent can we expect that we would have justice? So I would like to encourage us right now, seriously, to roll up our sleeves, because we are the community, and understand that violence against women didn't start because of the police or the legal systems. And it won't stop because of the police or the legal systems. And to what extent we as a community are a risk. Community, I'm talking about you. And to what extent we are a resource. This is our issue. Women are over 50% of the population, and a vast majority of us are dealing with violence. Dahlia set the context. How many of us are dealing with sexual violence? Rosa talked about what's happening to immigrant women who are not speaking English being arrested. We all have a responsibility to take this up, and that we have to get behind the frontline women's organizations. We need you. We need you to get behind our work. We need you to support us in every effort that we take in order to have a legal remedy. Pro bono, please. Because we are rubbing two nickels together, trying to make it work. And it is an uphill climb, and we need you to work with us. Apply the knowledge and take action. I will just finish and with a quote from Lila Watson, who is an Indigenous woman from Australia, who reminds us, if you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let's work together. We need you. We need you.
I just want to reread that quote. If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work. What a great kind of call to action. Thank you very much, Angela, for ending with that. We do have time to take a few questions. We want to make sure that this is a satisfying experience, these next 20 minutes, because I'm sure that there's 1,000 questions floating around in the room right now. But if any of our volunteers have a question in hand, please let me know right away. Okay, here we come. Donna, let me just, as we're waiting to gather a couple of questions, let me just turn to you and ask what can be done to address this? This has been such an evening of ideas and clearly a lot of problems. But where to begin or where to continue the work to seek out a justice system that is justice for all?
And that's your easy question.
I didn't say easy, I said one question. Big one.
I just think we have to come at it from all angles. From my perspective, I've talked about at least a bit the devaluation in law schools and in the practice of law of areas like family law and poverty law that aren't really part of the mainstream conversation. I think we have to work harder at educating all of the people in the justice system and all of the people, about the issues that women face and the consequences of them. Those are just a couple of the many things that I think we could do. Obviously, resources and talking to our members of our legislative assemblies and Parliament to see if the resources can be spent on issues important to women, not fighter planes. You have my point.
Okay, I'm just trying to get these unpacked here. Okay, this one, I think we should address this one. Can you comment on the Missing Women's Inquiry in terms of what it says about access to justice for women? Look at them all rushing for the microphones. Any one of you could address that question, but if one of you would, I'd appreciate it.
It's hard to know where to start with that. I know there's a number of community organizations in the room that, like us, applied for standing at the Missing Women Inquiry in order to raise important issues of the intersections of gender and race and class and participation in sex work to the inquiry, and to provide partly what I was talking about, that systemic perspective, and partly to provide a frontline perspective. And as you know, and it's probably the person who asked this question knows, we were granted standing at the inquiry, anyone who applied, but were turned down in terms of getting funding, which, as a reality of community groups, meant that we were not able to participate in what has turned out to be a mammoth inquiry with millions of pages of evidence. What it says about access to justice, it says that the government doesn't value our participation. This says that the government didn't value the roles of women, of frontline workers, of people who had experience that they could bring about the systemic sexism and racism that gave rise to this problem in the first place. I could go on and on. As I say, it's hard to know where to start, and it's hard to know where to stop, but those are my initial thoughts.
Thank you. Section 32 of the Charter states that the application of the Charter only applies to government, not to individuals, businesses, or organizations. So how then does the Charter apply to individuals that do not have a case against the government? One of our lawyers, or
I'll jump in again unless Donna, you want to?
Oh, it's yours.
The Charter does not apply to disputes between individuals. It applies to regulate our relationship as individuals with the government. So it applies to control how the government treats us. There's some room in that for talking about how the state regulates relationships between individuals, if that makes sense. So to tie it down to a context, one of the ways in which I think about this particular issue a lot is thinking about how we can bring legal aid as a huge issue facing women that you've heard about throughout today's panel, getting access to legal aid for family law problems, and how to make that a constitutionally challengeable issue. We can't make it challengeable about between the spouses, between two people fighting for legal aid, but can we use the Charter to force the government to adequately fund legal aid is still somewhat of an open question. There's a narrow door for us there, and one that many of us on the panel are working hard to try to wedge open a little bit further.
Anyone else on the panel want to address that question? Huh? Okay. This one comes with a preface. For me, ending violence against women must involve ending all forms of violence, including the violence of policing, incarceration, and other mechanisms of the prison industrial system. Where do you see strategies being practiced that do not rely on the state to hold perpetrators of violence accountable and create a safety for women within their communities? Which speaks to your point, I think, Angela.
Yes. So where do we see that? In our dreams.
Come on.
I don't have any examples. Just even within the community, my small community, ceremonial people, we're even trying to figure out how to deal with, problems within our community. That is just, small communities. It is a challenge, actually. And that is a challenge I think we have to take up. I would invite forums to contemplate that, truly.
How do we start to say no to the violence that we know is around us? We tend to turn a blind eye, and we don't talk about these things out in polite society. So how do we start to take an active interest in the safety of each other?
Well, I don't live in polite society.
So we make noise.
I don't know. No disrespect, but that I move in the world that's just about violence against women all day, every day. So so that's all we talk about where I am. There's nothing else to be discussed. And from our point of view, it is endemic. So, that's all I do every day. Roll up the sleeves and have that conversation and try and make it accessible to society. And it's a steep climb, not a popular topic.
Yeah, please, Rosa.
So I think that violence happens in isolation, and what a lot of people in the society do is to isolate workers, right? So in the sense of saying, good for you, that's so good that you work with those women. Oh, maybe that happened in those immigrant communities, right? Or I'm going to refer that woman to you, or I'm going to refer that woman to this system. So it's very important to understand that violence affects us all, that as women, we, as Dalia said, 1 in 3 women experience violence at least once in her lifetime. So this is a community's responsibility, and if we isolate the issue, we are contributing to violence.
Dalia, did you want to?
I just wanted to quickly add that I think that because so many of us have been groomed over our socialization and our lifespan to tolerate so much, our saturation point of what we look at and how we input images and ideas, we're so desensitized to it that if we actually made the conscious choice to start problematizing, to start having issue with the movies we're watching, the media we're witnessing every day, examples or jokes that we're not saying anything or challenging people in our circles, if we chose to make those small changes, I think that the tolerance and the desensitization might start to switch it around. And so, if we start at the ground, eventually it'll get up there. And, if there are focused targets on having more women move into law school, then perhaps as we become more conscious of these things, we will infiltrate.
The problem is actually not women going to law school, it's women staying in the practice. Right. What happens is that they graduate from law school and then they don't want to participate in a system that they don't feel is meeting the needs of themselves or the communities that they hope to serve. And so they leave. And it's a tragedy because they've got this knowledge and education but get beaten down by a system that is not changing to absorb the changes that they want to see put forward. Here's one that any of you could answer. What aspects of the Crown's charging policy need to change so that sexual assault cases are pursued? How can advocates working with women help to ensure that women are seen as credible when they report and testify about sexual assaults and are not seen as unreliable or unbelievable because of addiction issues, the impacts of their trauma, or for other reasons related to their marginalization?
So I deal with this every day, and I don't have the answer. I'm currently in the process of just trying to get Crown to call a client back. It's been 2 months. since her charges were stayed and the person was released from custody, and she still doesn't have clear answers about why she wasn't considered credible after one interview with Crown Counsel. So I think that for the small percentage of women who actually report to police, who actually get Crown approval, there's still a huge number of cases that end up getting stayed 2 years down the road. So women are signing over 2 years of their life, and then they're hearing that, there's credibility issues, or there's evidentiary issues, or something's happened. I think that, we say that the law is supposed to be objective and unbiased, but I think that there's a very particular set of values that are being used to make these decisions, and it's certainly not one to fight violence against women. So I think that if we actually made a commitment as a society to fight violence against women, then those would be the values that would be attributed to those decisions. It would be about taking women's credibility without needing a psychiatrist to interview them. I was thinking when I saw that slide that Donna put up, wow, we really haven't come that far since 1940. When the sentiment that I get over and over again is, well, there were just two people in the room, and since there's a defense of mistaken consent, what can you do? Well, I don't know. I think we all have to be kind of fed up in order for things to make waves, and I still can't get over the fact that the young woman from Maple Ridge had to hold a press conference with her father to ask for people to come forward. It's just beyond my imagination.
I'd like to
Please
add one point that relates just to the idea that Crown prosecutors or judges, aside from all of these important issues that we're talking about, somehow actually have a magic ability to assess credibility and find facts. And I think that we need to do a lot more work. Some is being done just about that whole process, because if you're hearing that, well, a judge won't believe her, you may have the same set of circumstances in front of 5 different judges and get different results. So we need to do a whole lot more work around that issue.
There's a couple of questions along this line. Sorely, the media has played a role in drawing the illustration that a glass ceiling is a thing of the past. What needs to happen in the media to get some equality?
Except that we don't have it.
Well, there was a beautiful film that was done by Jennifer Newsom called Misrepresentation that was actually showed again here in Vancouver on the weekend, the third time since. And she in her film, very U.S. focused, but she really explains why media representations contribute to women's inequality and dismantle women's sense of self and inhibit women's access of public life and access of legal remedies. I recommend taking a look at the trailer, and if you get a chance to view the film, she just breaks it down that the media is owned by corporations which are headed by white men who want to make money, and that for anybody working within the systems, whether we're talking about the news media, advertising, or entertainment, that it is a very narrow scope of which stories can be shaped. We did do last week, Battery and Support Services did a how does she resist media representations contributing to violence against girls and women, and 7 blogs that really detail the extent to which media dismantles women's identity, contributes to our limiting our access, and it's driven, of course, by the same systems that we've been talking about, and that in 1997. When we talk about missing women from this neighborhood and murdered women from this neighborhood, in 1997, the media, were using derogatory terms to refer to women, terms that are abhorrent, and that at the time, the Solicitor General and the mayor of Solicitor General and the mayor of Vancouver and the police chief were all in cahoots in saying that women that were missing were actually, just not wanting to be found. And that they had rewards, $1,000 rewards for women to come forward. Come forward and reveal yourself and you'll get $1,000. And women were dead. And at that time, the media, and it was, those, you can't find those articles now. I don't know, they're not on the net. But the news, the advertising, and entertainment is constructed in very clear ways that disempower us. Every moment, we receive 3,000 images a day that tell us how we are supposed to be in the world. And, we're saturated by that. It is profound. And rape culture is embedded in all of that. Uncritiqued. No analysis. I think media literacy, to take, the words of Jennifer Posner from Women in News and Media, based in New York City, I take her words that media literacy, it is essential for us to engage in that. Seriously.
Question everything.
Yes.
All the time. I'm going to spend these last 2 minutes by having each of our panelists talk about one thing. What one thing would you like people to walk out of here and think about or do with regard to gender injustice? Can I start with you at the end there, Dorothy?
Well, I guess I would go back to the point I made about, ways of thinking about equality and how we can get, different conceptions of what constitutes equality into the public culture, and the media could play a large role in that. And just to follow up on Angela's comments, I think one of the things about the media is that there are it's not that there aren't any feminists there, but a lot of the feminists who work in media are running scared these days, and so there aren't strong feminist voices in the media. Like, I'm thinking of people like Michelle Landsberg, who was a strong voice for decades through the 80s and 90s, and now we have Margaret Wente, or there are women. The problem is there are women in the media, but they're not speaking out as feminists, right? And so that would be sort of on my wish list, that we could, sort of get back to, or go beyond, but build on the time when we did have a lot of feminist voices in our institutions, such as the media. So,
thank you. Rosa.
So I just want to say that if we want planet Earth to continue, we have to put women at the center, and we have to address this issue of violence against women. And I think we are doing it, at least the people who are here, because you are sitting here, you are listening, you made time to come today, so I just hope that you keep doing what you are doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
I echo that. I think that this, we are a community, and I am about us as a community strengthening the web of support for ourselves and for our sisters and for our brothers, and that does start with ourselves, each and every one of us.
Thank you. Dahlia.
Just to bring it back to the really concrete for a moment, I echo all of those ideas, but I encourage all of us to stay inspired, which, as I said at the beginning, that this kind of gathering really does. One practical thing that people could do is to fight for legal aid, to make legal aid an issue in our election at all levels of government, because there's different ways that the levels of government interact on this issue. It really is a huge issue for women, for marginalized people, for low-income people, to get access, just to get in the door of the justice system. So I really encourage all of us to try to ensure that that becomes an issue to be discussed at the next election.
Thank you. Gail.
I echo what the others have said and encourage you all to learn about urban Aboriginal issues and become familiar with the truth that's out there and share that amongst yourselves and talk about these things that aren't really being said in the media and through our school systems around the realities. And as I said earlier, we can't do this alone. We need the community beside us, with us, to help us change the things that aren't working for Aboriginal peoples. And this is based on the fact that many of our Indigenous ways, we value women and we value children, and we need to honor that from all sectors of our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. I called you Gail again. I don't know why I'm doing that. I'm sorry. Thank you, Grace.
I guess for me, it kind of goes back to what I mentioned earlier. I think that realizing that we're all implicated in this and not turning a blind eye or finding a million other things to do in your day to kind of say, well, that doesn't really impact my life, so I'm not going to spend 2 minutes on doing it. I think there's really easy ways that you can spread messages, particularly in our culture of social media. Even if you're to share, somebody's article or status that you like that highlights issues around violence against women, supporting community events. This is amazing that people have come out tonight. But I just think continuing to question everything that you see in the media and writing letters, if you like writing letters, when you see headlines in the media that say that Crown has stayed charges against another sexual assault case, because it really does impact us all. Thanks.
Thanks, Dahlia. And last word to you, Donna.
I'm so inspired by everything that I've heard this evening, but my one point would be to say, spread the message to everybody that that family law and access to justice for women matter.
Thank you all very, very much for being with us tonight. And look at that. I believe you're getting a standing ovation. So. And I'd like to very much thank Darcy Bennett for the idea and for Amjo Hall for his generosity in ensuring that we have a venue for this. Okay. Great. Get home safely, everyone, and keep the conversation alive. Thank you.